World record speed run all 4 buildings to level 3 in 17.3 seconds. With 16 Jag engineers all hitting at the same time, that's gotta be a world record, right? If no one knows, then no one can prove otherwise, right? But you're not here for my sick speedrunning skills. You want to see what the highest and lowest possible damage engineer can do is. Well, I got you covered. That's what we're gonna find out right after this video sponsor. No, it can't be. Is it Raid Shadow Legends? Yes. You know it. You love it. The game where you could raid bosses, do dungeon runs, campaign battles, PvP arena matches, all with millions of different options for champion combinations. Wow, how do they do it? You got champions like Cleopteryx. Yeah, that's the real name. She's super strong and available to everyone through daily login rewards. Or you've got characters like Tatura Rhymehide. That's also the real name. This lion-looking fellow who will increase your team's defense and block debuffs. What more could you possibly want? But also this month, they've released a new faction, the Sylvan Watchers, with a bunch of new champions, and a new season of the Forge Pass, so you can get some pretty rad gear that way. Right now, Amazon Prime members will also get exclusive rewards. You can download Raid Shadow Legends for mobile or PC with this QR code right here, or the links below. New players will get a free starter pack worth almost $30, a free champion, Verges, and also this in-game loot. And you can find these rewards right here in your inbox for the next 30 days only. So, go see what's up. Okay, back to the video. For the basics, as usual, the shotgun has a max damage of 315 when mini-crit boosted with a strength power-up against a Warrior Spirit Heavy, and a minimum damage of 0 from long range against a Vaccinator Ubered Fist of Steel Heavy under the effects of the Battalion's backup, who is also carrying the Resistance power-up. But the Widowmaker, with its 10% damage bonus against your Sentry's target, can deal up to 346. A whopping 31 higher than the shotgun. It's clearly a very useful stat. But that stat is actually still in effect even if your Sentry has no ammo. As long as it thinks it's shooting someone, the damage bonus will kick in, so that's kind of fun. Also, you know what's a little bit odd? Is that the Widowmaker's metal recovery is not affected at all by resistances. So in this example, I'm only dealing 27 damage to this resistance power-up Fist of Steel Heavy, but I'm regaining the full amount of metal I would have if he wasn't resisting it. Also, for some reason, when dealing the Widowmaker's max normal damage of 90, it always seems to round down the returned metal to 89. So there you go, you get some Engineer Bugbuster content in your max damage video. It's a 2-in-1. What a deal! The Panic Attack's max damage is 377, and the Thompson can deal a max damage of 252 and a minimum of 1. So hey, that's better than the shotguns. And just like the Righteous Bison, the Thompson's laser is also technically counted as bullet damage, so it will be resisted by the Vaccinator's bullet shield. And in case you were wondering, with its minus 80% damage penalty against buildings, the Thompson will only deal 3 damage against a Wrangled Sentry. So it'll take 72 hits, but you can technically destroy a Wrangled level 3 with the Thompson. If you could do that in an actual match, you win. You beat TF2. And finally, the Engineer Primary with the lowest max damage is the Rescue Ranger, with its highest damage only being 210. But like the Thompson, it also has a minimum of 1. Engineer more or less only has 2 damage dealing secondaries. The Pistol with a max damage of 79 and a minimum of 0, and the Short Circuit, which has 2 different ways of dealing damage. And both ways are actually pretty weird. The Short Circuit's primary fire, despite being electricity, is also considered bullet damage. It has a base damage of 10, and technically has some fall off, making its minimum standard damage 9. But for some reason, the primary fire deals 90% less damage to buildings, only having a base damage of 1. And if you use that against a Wrangled Sentry, which reduces damage by 66%, it doesn't do any damage at all. Why does it deal 90% less damage to buildings? I don't know. When is an engineer ever going to use a Short Circuit against an enemy building? But the weirdness continues because the Short Circuit, with both of its attack types, is one of the few weapons in the game to not be able to be crit boosted at all. Crits just don't have any effect. But at the same time, like pretty much anything that can't full crit, it can actually mini crit. So that means the Short Circuit's maximum primary fire damage is 37 with mini crits and strength against the Warrior Spirit Heavy. But the secondary fire has a higher maximum damage with 15 and can also hit multiple times with a single shot. Though the most I could get it to hit against one target was 3 times, for a max damage of 159 with one single Electro Ball thing. But you can also use it against multiple targets at once, with the max damage I was able to get against 16 Warrior Spirit Heavies being 371. Interestingly, and actually kind of a surprise to me, is that the alt fire from the short circuit actually has no effect against buildings at all. It'll impact with them, but it won't deal any kind of damage. And maybe even more interestingly, is that while the primary fire is considered bullet damage, the secondary fire is technically untyped. That means that none of the Vaccinator shield will have any effect on it, and neither will the Fist of Steel. So it's only the resistance power-up and the battalion's backup that have any effect on lowering the alt fire's damage. This means that the secondary fire has a minimum of 5, and the primary has a minimum of 1. Or 0 for both if you want to count buildings. And Engineer does, of course, also have the Wrangler as a secondary, and while it does change the overall DPS of the Sentry, it is still using the Sentry damage, so we'll get to that a little bit later. And for Engineer's melees, it's also about what you'd expect. The Wrench, Gunslinger, and Eureka effect all have a max damage of 390 and a minimum of 17. I thought that maybe the Gunslinger's third punch crit might bypass the strength and crit's inability to stack with each other, because it's kind of like a special crit. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, so the Gunslinger's max is also only 390. But for the Southern Hospitality, while it does also have a max crit damage of 390, if you're mini crit boosted and carrying the strength power up at the same time, all that bleed damage will do 11 damage per tick for a maximum of 110 extra bleed damage. And then the Jag deals the least damage with 293 max and 13 minimum. But against buildings, the Jag normally has a base damage of 32, and that's reduced to just 10 against a Wrangled Sentry. Which is actually weird, because if you do all the math out, it should be dealing 11 damage to a Wrangled Sentry. Where does the extra 1 damage go? It's a spooky mystery. Now when it comes to Sentries, bullets from a level 1, 2, and 3 actually all have the same base damage. The difference in damage output comes from a firing speed increase from level 1 to 2, and gaining rockets from level 2 to 3. But when it comes to the bullets, Sentries have a base damage of 16, and actually have a small amount of ramp up where they deal up to 19 damage at close range. And bullets from a Sentry, of course, cannot be crit boosted, nor are they affected by the strength power-up. But they can be mini crits if the Engineer is mini crit boosted, or if the target is marked for death or covered in Jarate. And that means, against a Warrior Spirit Heavy, each bullet can deal a max of 34 damage. Which maybe doesn't sound that impressive, but we'll get to the overall DPS of Sentries in a little bit. As for the minimum damage, Sentries will actually suffer from damage fall-off when outside their normal range. This means that with the Wrangler, from long distance, each bullet can deal as little as 8 damage normally. But you actually have to be super far away for it to get that low. From all the way back here, where basically every other weapon in the game is at max fall-off, a Wrangled Sentry is still dealing 11 damage. But yeah, if a heavy with all the standard resistances is all the way back there, and is being shot by a Wrangled Sentry, that Sentry can deal 0 damage. However, from inside a Sentry's normal range, the minimum is 1. And while the Mini Sentry does fire 25% faster than a level 1, its base damage is also halved, which means that the max is 17, and the minimum, even without the Wrangler, is 0. And a level 3's rockets are where things get weird again, because unlike a Sentry's bullets, where the damage they deal is based on the relation of the distance from the target to the Sentry, a level 3's rocket damage is based on how close the target is to the Engineer himself. For example, when I'm standing all the way back here, the rockets only deal 53 damage, but when I'm standing next to the heavy, it deals 148. So that's a pretty big difference. What's also strange is that the strength power-up actually does affect the damage of rockets, where it doesn't change the Sentry's bullet damage at all. And this means that by standing on top of a Warrior Spirit Heavy, while strength and mini-crit boosted, I was able to get a single thing of rockets to deal 522 damage. And yes, you can use this to kill 16 Warrior Spirit Heavies at once, which of course is a very common scenario that you see in the game all the time. But in terms of damage per second, a Mini has a maximum potential DPS of 102 on its own, or 187 with the Wrangler. A level 1 has a max normal DPS of 170, or 272 with the Wrangler. A level 2, 272 again on its own, or 374 with the Wrangler. And a level 3 does 796, or 898 with the Wrangler. And I mean, it's not quite Heavy's max damage per second, but it's still pretty good. But Engineer has another secret weapon up his sleeve. And I ain't talking about his taunt kills, because his taunt kills are actually not that impressive. Neither the Frontier Justice or the Gunslinger taunts are able to hit multiple enemies at once, so that's already kinda limiting to what they're able to do. And the guitar from the Frontier Justice is actually considered melee damage, which I guess makes sense. And that means you can deal a minimum of 130 or a maximum of 2,700. Also, the ragdolls from this taunt will always have their heads pushed down, which I think is pretty funny. But the Gunslinger taunt, despite using the robot hand, which is, like, its Engineer's melee weapon, is not considered melee damage. In fact, the start of the taunt, where you stun the enemy, deals bullet damage, and then the end, where it actually kills, is explosive damage. So all that's wrong. But it is possible for the Gunslinger's taunt kill damage to be brought down to just 24, and the maximum with the last hit is 1,755, which is expected, but kinda disappointing. But Engineer still has one more option. Something that strikes fear in the hearts of any enemy that dare carelessly stand on top of it. Yeah, that's right, we're talking telefrags. Technically, any class can telefrag any other class, but it all requires an Engineer. And Engineer is the only class who's totally able to do it by himself, so we're gonna count this for him. I think that's fair. And going into this, I thought, you know what? Telefrags are probably going to be considered environmental kills. It's probably not going to count as you actually dealing that damage. But to my surprise, you do. You just straight up deal 1,000 damage to the person you collide with. So that's a pretty good start. And then I wanted to see if it was ever possible to live a telefrag without cheating. I knew this already, but just to show, an Uber charge will not block the damage from it. However, the resistance power-up will reduce it to 500. But the Fists of Steel have no effect on it, and disappointingly, neither does the battalion's backup. So this does mean that 500 is the minimum damage a telefrag could do, and not even a fully overhealed heavy can live that. However, if you do cheat to give a player a ton of overheal and you telefrag them, they'll just take the damage and you'll be inside them. They don't die, you're not stuck, and you can both just move around like normal after that. So, unfortunately, nothing super crazy happens here. There's no wacky hijinks to be had. But for the max telefrag damage, we have our usual setup of Strength, Mini Crits, and a Warrior Spirit Heavy to increase the telefrag damage from 1,000 to 3,510. And with 16 heavies standing on the exit of the teleporter, we have the setup for Engineer's highest possible damage. And that was 56,160 damage in one single hit. It's not quite Demoman's 94,000 damage, or Soldier's several trillion damage, but I think Engineer holds his own pretty well here. And with all the defensive classes out of the way, that means that Medic is next. And for that video, we might have to spice things up a little bit. Maybe slowest and fastest healing, that might be kind of fun. We'll figure that out next time. But as usual, thanks for watching, and thanks to my patrons like Varric, Captain Forex, Egox, Colonel, Probably Vinegar, Caponicus, Kelso the Pirate, Pillsman's Fox, Kybird96, Scout with a Name, Glump, Salt God, Lavi, Taupe, Time Consuming, Man344, Nolan46, and Melodici. Alright, peace out, dogs.